Right folks, let's recreate these epic Hollywood hero shots. It can't be that hard, can it? It's just one shot after all. Alina's armed with a state-of-the-art gimbal. This is going to be fantastic. Oh, that's disappointing. Let's try again. This is surely an easy spinning shot of Nicolas Cage in The Rock. Hey, that's more like it. Let's look at the two side by side. Oh my goodness, you can barely even tell the difference. Hollywood, where's the big bucks? I'm ready and waiting. Alina and I spent years creating wedding films using gimbals for this high production value Hollywood hero shot type approach. And we got great results because it's not something you typically expect to see from your wedding videographer. Weddings are uncontrolled environments, so you just shoot as much as you can and hope for the best, whereas here we're going for a deliberate Michael Bay style hero shot with a beginning and an end point. It's a different proposition. The critics can say what they like about Michael Bay films. The bottom line is, if you and I as small creators can get anywhere close to this kind of look, then your footage will look amazing. In this video, we're going back to our roots to break down this kind of shooting style, so you too, with fairly minimal investment and equipment, can get this kind of intense, parallax, cinematic result. We're even trying the latest technology in the form of the DJI Raveneye with the video transmission system and active track to see if that can help us out. As you can see, I'm running around. That's me going as fast as I can in a circle without falling, believe it or not. And the active track's kind of helping me out. We'll get into that in a minute. Anyway, stay tuned. I think you might find this interesting. By Hollywood standards, this is not a complicated shot, but we've identified at least 10 component parts that go into making this shot what it is. First up, our subject is revealed. He's not just standing there, he rises up into the frame. And second of all, he's filmed from a low angle, which makes him look impressive and imposing. Third, we're filming on a fairly long lens here, probably 50mm or above, giving compression between the background elements and the subject, and thereby enhancing the sense of parallax as the camera rotates. Fourth, we're filming on a fairly low f-stop, giving us shallow depth of field. And fifth, the lens in question will have been a manual focus lens, which brings challenges in terms of keeping our subject in focus. Next up, we have background elements in the form of the buildings, and this gives us an intense sense of motion as the camera rotates rapidly around the subject. Such rapid rotation is difficult for you and I to do on a gimbal, especially when you consider that many of these shots have a defined start and end point, so we need camera control. We have an Oscar-winning actor who's able to convey emotion, and we have the innumerable other elements that go into a shot like this, like set design, costume, lighting, so on and so forth. So as a small creator, what on earth are we to do with all this information? Well, first things first, grab yourself a copy of our 3-page creator's cheat sheet where we break down 10 Hollywood strategies to get you filming great footage with any camera, anytime. Next up, we need to talk about the gear, the settings, and the execution of this hero shot. First of all, you're going to need a camera with a portrait lens capable of shooting somewhat shallow depth of field. This longer portrait focal length is required to increase the compression that takes place between your foreground, midground, and background elements, thereby enhancing the sense of parallax as you rotate around your subject. Sticking with gear, you are going to need a gimbal for these smooth, glossy shots. We're not going for a handheld look here. We're not sponsored by DJI for this video, but we did use the Ronin RSC2 and it did a very good job. We would recommend you use manual focus for these shots. Now in reality we have to use manual focus because the autofocus on our Panasonic GH5 is not very good. Even if you have one of these stunning Sony or Canon cameras with amazing autofocus, it's not really going to help you out because if you start with your subject off the frame and bring them in for that sense of suspense, there's nothing to focus on. You have to pick a manual focus point where your subject is going to be as and when they appear in the scene. In terms of aperture, we were shooting on a full frame equivalent aperture of f3.4, giving us a pretty shallow plane of focus and knocking the background out of focus. Be sure to hook your lens up with an ND filter so we get the motion blur the eye is accustomed to seeing when watching cinematic footage. When you're starting out, we'd recommend you shoot in slow motion. We filmed in 50 frames per second and slowed to 25 frames per second for some of these shots. First of all, many of our references are filmed in slow motion. You can see from the speed of the blinking actors that things have been slowed down. And second of all, it provides us with a little bit of margin for user error when it comes to rotating that gimbal around your subject. With shallow depth of field and manual focus, it becomes a challenge to keep your subject in focus. So put some markings on the ground. In the first instance, we used the pattern of the bricks. In the second instance, we scraped some lines into the dirt basically, so we knew where to step for our start and end points, so we didn't get too close or too far away from our subject. If you increase your chances of getting sharp focus at the time of capture by keeping your lens a little bit wider, but you feel that you've missed out on a little bit of that intense parallax, then crop in post. At least you've got a sharp image to work with, whereas if you choose a 200mm lens at the time of capture, the chances are you're not going to get a good outcome in the first place. Did DJI's wireless monitoring system Raveneye offer any assistance here? Much like the drones, you have an active track option where you can select your subject on the screen and the software will keep the subject in the center of the frame by moving the gimbal accordingly. The results were actually pretty impressive when we were shooting at a 50mm full frame equivalent. The active track did a really good job of locking the subject in the center of the frame. This allowed me to focus on my feet essentially and not on the camera, and thereby increase the speed at which I was able to run around Alina. Provided we didn't get in too close, even when I went around the back of Alina and the subject matter changed essentially, the active track did a good job of locking focus on the subject. Because I was really going for it, it did create this kind of pulsing motion as the active track focus area was moving from left to right on the screen. It was smooth and undulating, so it was okay, but I wouldn't want to watch this shot for too long. It would probably make me a bit seasick. Added to that, we couldn't reveal our actor in this shot because the subject has to be in the composition from the very first frame. You can't have them drop out the frame and then come up into the frame like some of our references. But if you do have access to the Raveneye system, I definitely recommend you give it a go. Anyway, it's been a pleasure to have you with us as always. We had a bit of fun on this one and look forward to sharing with you our next one. So do stay in touch and we will see you next time.